second, how Islam guides us in looking on this topic. In the first part, we will try to understand why we talk about emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is essentially a matter of making judgments based on emotion or on reason. Among the psychologists of the West, it has been a continuous problem. When we make a judgment, is it based on the cognitive part of our brain or the emotional part, which is, according to them, which resides in amygdala? Amygdala is just like an almond, a small thing. We'll come to see a diagram also. But how this process takes place of making decision. On that, they say that sometimes people make a judgment in 1/12,000 of a second, and that does not involve cognitive process, but a snap judgment. Exactly the words used by Gordon. Daniel Gordon, to whom I refer in this, and whose very popular book, Emotional Intelligence, became a bestseller. He talks about it and tells us that clinical psychologists think that emotional mind is far quicker than the rational mind. Its quickness precludes the deliberate analytical reflection that is hallmark of thinking mind. Actions that spring from the emotional mind carry a particularly strong sense of certainty. ये है जो मैं आपके सामने कर रहा हूँ. They spring from emotional mind and they are more strong than other things, and ultimately one later on says why I did it, but after doing that. So the emotional mind can read an emotional reality in an instant, making the intuitive snap judgments. ये quotations हैं, quotation नहीं है, लेकिन just what he has said on these pages. I just try to summarize that. The crux of the issue is that human being goes through a process of struggle between his rational mind and his emotional mind, which he calls heart. And we will talk about it later also. So many of the feelings are based on emotions. And he tells us that how various chemicals cause these responses, and if we are able to monitor and control those chemicals, we can avoid those circumstances at the same time. Here is what I was talking about, the forehead, where you have here the neocortex, and then you have amygdala, which is very small substance here, but it is linked with the nervous system, and that's how the whole process takes place. To summarize the whole thing, psychology and medical science focuses on either biological or chemical aspects of human body, and they try to address these at these two different levels. Certain flow of chemicals, adrenaline release, and certain responses of the body. Everything is understood in terms of those glands which are releasing a chemical, and that chemical is leading to a feeling. So in psychology, you try to find out why a person is angry, why happy, and all those are based on ultimately chemical analysis. Therefore, you give certain chemicals to make a person more pleasant and come out of depression or become more active and so on and so forth. So human being is treated biologically or chemically in all these disciplines. Therefore, the earlier discussion of this struggle going on between the two domains, the domain of cognitive rational behavior and the domain of emotional behavior, one prevails over the other at one time or the other. It's an ongoing struggle. This is in a summarized way of what is what we are told. So, in the empirical psychological paradigm, judgments are subject to pathological analysis of emotions. Human behavior and response are understood, interpreted empirically based on either chemical or biological. Now, the reason is all the concepts in sociology, anthropology, chemistry, all are based on what we said a while ago. Local customs become social construct or practice of people. When it's done, it becomes values and laws. This is a very simple diagram that tells you about law, about psychology, about religious beliefs of people, about social development. Think of any area. This is the natural process of empirical paradigm of knowledge in which you are born, I was born, and which we are teaching for 200 years in our universities and will be teaching for maybe another 100 years. This is a different paradigm which does not exist right now. In this paradigm, it is divine guidance or wahi or sharia, whatever you call it, that provides universal values we talked a while ago. These values change the custom and behavior. Arabs were very brave people, but when Islam came, this braveness was no more a matter of tribal pride. It was a matter of izzah for Allah, not for watan, not for qawm, but Allah's supremacy, a paradigm shift. Therefore, this is the basis of everything. Now, this is elaborated in very simple words. Divine guidance from beyond guides through wahi or revelation in an objective manner, which means it is not a subjective issue. It is not subject to a place or an individual. It is objective. It is outside the individual, not a subjective or intuitive or mystical, not how I experience spiritually and feel about it. And similarly, it's not purely rational. It has rational approach, but it's not purely rational. Or personal judgmental approach, which means relativist ethics. Everyone says, well, it's not your business. It's how I like. This is what we feel good. Who are you to interfere? All those aspects. So this diagram tells us what the difference is. Based on this, when we try to understand what Islamic ethical paradigm, then it is not particularistic, not confined to Arabs or non-Arabs. It makes use of cognitive faculty as well as emotions. It offers a holistic ethical intelligence where universal ethical values play a foundational role. Therefore, it is contrary to the concept of Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence. He tells us in his book of about 400 pages that if you are able to train your emotional intelligence, you can make better judgments. But that is based on purely empirical processes. And that means particular, that means limited, that means not universal. No psychologist or anthropologist, after studying 200 cases, can declare that these cases provide a basis for universal applicability all over the world. And that's why you have, even in your diseases, classification. These are specific to the Orient, to African countries, to certain climates and not other climates. So the point here is, when we talk about this emotional intelligence, which is a method of how emotions play a role, we said here that it is a matter of both cognitive and emotions, and it's a holistic ethical intelligence. It is not an intelligence based on certain biological or chemical processes which lead a person to act. Therefore, you have even uh, gases invented which make people angry, which make people depressed, disappointed, frustrated. All those are used, which are chemicals for their responses. The Quran recognizes the role of both reason and emotions, and therefore we first talk about the role of reason. In that, it tells us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed us with various facilities like hearing and sight, and all these ultimately merge into a process of meaning them. And then it tells us, sorry, we were, where were we? Oh, we were right. So it recognizes both, and then you find that it wants us to have our process of cognitive reasoning based on a process of investigation, of looking into all those aspects which are used for empirical verification. And then it talks about a process where your cognitive aspects are highlighted, like tafakkur, then taqul, which also refers to cognitive aspect, tadabbur refers to cognitive aspect, tafaqquh refers to cognitive aspect, tazkir refers to cognitive aspect, and the role of heart in Islamic model is also emphasized by the Quran, like here, the heart as seat of emotions. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quite often creates a feeling in the hearts of people who may be large in number, and Muslim may be small, but the small number dominates over them. And then similarly, this heart is also seat of learning, tenderness, kindness, and love. This is also seat of consolation. So it increases their concept of peace and satisfaction. It's also a place where the things are sometimes hidden, like hypocrisy. It's also a seat of illness sometimes, because nifaq is called as a disease of heart. And quite often people who are not prepared to change or listen, their hearts are hardened because they are not responding. Now, in all these aspects, you find what was said earlier with reference to aql and tafaqquh is also being shared by heart here. and then sealing of hearts by Subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is a process in which people uh, knowingly reject truth. It also becomes a seat of pondering and reflection. So, the tadabbur, which was earlier a matter of cognitive process, here is used in terms of qalb. That means the holistic ethical intelligence provides an ethical foundation to all human responses by integrating mind and heart. But what is the basis of that? The basis of it is essentially two simple words. One is halal and one is haram. All ethical judgments are based on these two simple Quranic terms. And in that, as said here, it is a holistic ethical intelligence. It's not just heart and mind which are struggling and one prevailing over the other, but it is a third factor, and that factor is whatever is being done, is that ethically permissible or non-permissible. Therefore, the point that is made here is that we have an ethical approach, holistic ethical intelligence. And that intelligence is what Quran wants to be applied and used, in which our empirical aspects of vision and understanding, as well as our uh, hearts, they are used for tafaqquh, and those who are not doing it are going to face serious consequences. The Quranic anthropology considers human beings essentially good and not sinful, or having evolved from a lower existence to a higher existence. So the Quran says, Ahsana taqweem, and then it talks about human self or nafs. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that there is a conscious uh, reminder which is in the mind of people, the nafs, which reminds to avoid what is wrong. And then you have a nafs which is inclined towards what is wrong. And then we have a nafs which is settled, which is fully satisfied and serene. So when you have this state, then your actions are based on what will please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and based on that he will be asking his servant to enter Jannah. The holistic ethical intelligence means that all these states of nafs are not three independent exclusive entities. These are three stages and responses of one and same nafs or self. But in these responses, an ethical, balanced person with nafs mutmainna makes all judgments spontaneously based on holistic ethical intelligence. The concept of what is halal and haram does not require a long cognitive process, nor just an emotional decision, but it provides the filter where reason and heart both have to submit and go through it. It is not independent functioning of heart and mind, as we are told by the current psychology. It is a synergized process in which biological and chemical aspects are not active, but subservient to what is ethically right and wrong, which means it is halal and haram. Again, halal and haram is not a matter of meat, liquid, whether it is liquor or milk. It is unslaughtered meat or slaughtered meat. But halal and haram are ethical categories that tell us whether it is halal to shout when you are not supposed to shout. Is it allowed to see what you're not supposed to see? Is it allowed to listen what you're not supposed to listen? Therefore, should I listen or see or act or taste or do is not a matter of just heart and mind. It is a matter of halal and haram. When this concept of halal haram is internalized, is absorbed, and not confined to certain substances. A common believer, when he is told this is halal or haram, the only thing that comes to his mind is liquor is haram, zina is haram, theft is haram, and then he can very easily misguide his wife by making statements which are wrong. He can very easily tell people, I'm a billionaire, when he's not a billionaire. All that becomes business, because unless I show that, I will not be able to exist in the market. Therefore, halal and haram are not specified categories, but this is the wider basis which has to be the basis for any action. Should I buy a dress or not? It's a matter of halal and haram. Am I buying it because this branded dress when I wear and meet my friends on Eid day, then they will judge me as a person of that status in society who wears a dress which is branded and in 3 figures, not 2 figures. Therefore, when you are shaking hand, when you are embracing a friend, then you are telling the person with your dress, is that halal or haram, although you can afford it. It's not a matter of that narrow approach of these two terms, which has become part of our vocabulary, but it's a matter of a much wider understanding, and that becomes the basis of ethical judgment in all matters. What kind of dress, what kind of speech, what kind of decoration in home, what kind of automobile. Do I need a 4-wheel drive in a place where there is no hilly side, where there is no 45-degree angle slopes where I need 4-wheel drive? Do I need an automobile of 200 and 2500 cc, or I can survive in 1000 cc? Why I am using it? Is halal or haram? Although I can afford it, but is it halal or haram? That was not a matter of just a few categories, a few things. So an ethical person with nafs mutmainna makes all judgments spontaneously. They are not made after long thinking cognitive process, but spontaneously. Is it halal or haram? Simple. Holistic intelligence or nafs mutmainna persuades a person to act ethically under divine guidance and consciously avoid what's haram and prohibited, and excel in doing good or maroof in all walks of life. Conclusion. Islam visualizes man as responsible or ameen, as rational or maqul, as ethical or muttaqi. All his actions are to be rationally pre-qualified in the light of universal ethical values of Tawheed. Is it, according to Tawheed, good for me to buy a four-wheel drive or not? Does it affect Tawheed? Do I serve Allah or serve social status by using that car? Then social status becomes my God, not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because that's more important for me, to show people how rich I am. What's my status? And therefore, is it also adl when millions of people are hungry and I believe that unless I have a dinner in a five-star hotel, is that adl or is that zulm? Behavioral activity. And similarly, is it maroof? Is it good or bad? Maroof refers to that good which is undisputed, which is recognized as what Allah has provided. And is it a matter of entering into munkar, something which is wrong and not correct? Is it a matter of bir or virtue? It's a matter of khair, good for people. It's a matter of taqwa, Allah consciousness. Halal Haram. Is it a matter of ihsan, having a feeling of Allah is watching you? Is it a matter of balance and tawazun? Is it a matter of haqq and observing fara'id? What are obligations? What is more obligatory? A person who is suffering from COVID, when he thinks that he must make every prayer in masjid because it is farida, what is obligatory? To make a prayer regularly with COVID in masjid and harm the people of masjid, or to pray at home while he is suffering from a disease. What is farida? It's not a matter of just what is taught in a fiqh book, that namaz is fard and therefore irrespective of whether you are causing hundreds of people suffer from a disease, you think proudly that I'm not missing my prayer in masjid, although I may be harming people. So, human mind and heart are to be synergized. Human responses are to be guided by the universal, holistic, ethical principles, and not by purely emotional, personal, biological, or psychological responses. Ethical intelligence pre-qualifies an action on the basis, misprint, on the basis of halal and haram, and guides a person in making on the spot responsible judgment. Ilm, hikmah, rushd, and qalb work together in accepting or rejecting a proposition leading to an ethically satisfied state or nafs mutmainna. Questions and additions, please. I have avoided a number of slides to save time for discussion. Ji?
Regarding nafs as mentioned in Quran, separate entities. Are they separate entities in every individual, or their development of one stage rather than the third? And where will we integrate in terms of heart and mind? Whether this nafs goes with the heart, or mind, or both.
Thank you very much. The term nafs has been translated differently by Muslim scholars. Some translate it as ruh, some translate as self, some translate as individual. But to my understanding, it is essentially a matter of that state of understanding where the Quran says a person is happy with Allah, Allah is happy with him. This concept of rida of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the person also becoming satisfied with that is nafs mutmainna. Nafs mutmainna is defined by the Quran itself as one who is fully satisfied with if Allah gives him some problems or some pleasure. In that he or she is pleased, does not complain. Whatever comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is welcomed. Therefore, this concept of nafs, that's why you find that over 98% of writings of Muslim scholars, including Ghazali and many others, lead people to think that Islamic psychology is a matter of ruh and nafs. These are two subjects which keep them busy in writing volumes and volumes. I don't agree with that. As said earlier, these three behaviors of nafs are not separate entities. It's one and same nafs, which may become inclined towards evil sometime, towards good sometime, and then ultimately become a satisfied, a serene nafs, which is the ideal. Serene nafs cannot be moved by wrong. It remains steadfast. Here in our discussion, its role is to reinforce ethical judgment. If nafs means self, then self is not physical individual. Just as personality is not something physical, but a combination of so many traits, so many kinds of behavior. A personality may be warm, may be repulsive, may be pleasant, but all that is not something physical as personality. These are all dimensions of the personality. Therefore, self is not something concrete or physical, but something which is there like mind. Mind is not something concrete. Brain is concrete. Brain can be analyzed and cured if there are some physical problems there, but not mind. Mind is something conceptual, yet it exists. A number of biological actions are not fully controlled by brain, but by mind. You are looking at me standing on my feet, although my image in your eyes is made reverse, but you are translating it into a person who is standing on feet, not on head. Who is doing it? Not your brain, but your mind. Therefore, there are many aspects which cannot be translated physically. Self is such a phenomenon which has no physical existence, but which has an ethical existence because it decides, helps in deciding matters ethically and morally. As I said earlier, this is not a uh, uh, fight between two domains, a domain of reason and a domain of emotion. In Islamic approach, the is this cognitive process halal or haram, this emotional process halal or haram. That's where they merge, synergize. halal and haram becomes the basis of emotional as well as cognitive responses. It is not so in the existing psychology and sociology. In the psychology which you and me are taught, these are two separate domains which struggle, and one dominates over the other because they have no concept of universal ethical existence of human being. For them, human being exists in terms of biological or chemical combination, which I said in the beginning. So the whole understanding of the issue has to be understood in its proper context. Its context defines its importance. For us, the food for thought is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with a holistic approach where we can avoid those extremes that take place either following pure rationalism or pure emotionalism. Hitler was most probably led by his emotional intelligence and not by cognitive intelligence. Actions are not cognitive, but mostly erratic and emotional. Now, if the person had the chance to combine both and then decide, should I kill X people and that is ethical for me or unethical, then he will behave differently. The way he behaved was essentially emotional intelligence. And we are told by psychologists that if you learn how to balance it, how to manage it, you can be a good human being, but only by managing it. An Islamic approach is not managing emotional intelligence, but it is developing a new approach where emotion and cognitive behavior both become subservient to an ethical approach. And that's what makes it holistic ethical intelligence and not emotional intelligence.
You said you use the tafakkur and
Ji,
tafakkur
ji.
and the state. Would you elaborate them a bit more so that you can
The
understand?
Quran has used all these terms and mostly defined those. When it talks about tafakkur, it tells us that it is not a matter of just your mind, but also your heart. Tafakkur in the Quran is a combination, which means an in-depth or holistic understanding of the issue. Tadabbur and tafakkur refers to pondering and having an analytical and critical approach of mind, where you are trying to differentiate things, classify them, and find out their implications. Tazkir has multiple meaning. It's not just remembrance, it's not just learning, it's also involvement. Therefore, tazkir is not just by listening to the Quranic reference to earlier nations, but it is by the Quran. It says very clearly, do tazkir with this book. And that means in-depth understanding and feeling that this book is for me, not for others. Similarly, tafakkur is not just a matter of pure cognitive process, but it's a matter of analysis. When the Quran uses it, it tells us that don't you see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changes climates, how is causing different bodies to move, how he is keeping a magnetic framework in universe. All these things are to be analyzed, and the purpose is one should be led to who is doing it. Therefore, it's not just intellectual activity, but a matter of how our behavior should be modified in view of using tazkir or tafakkur or taqul or all these processes. All these put together simply means Islamic faith is not dogma. Islamic faith is based on rational, emotional, holistic involvement. Most of the books of world religions, they talk about faith as dogma. You have to accept it without any kind of rational analysis. If Christians are told Sayyidina Isa is part of a triad in which God, Holy Ghost, and Father are one, no one can explain how. If they are told that this ceremonies they do in their church make people part of the body and flesh of Sayyidina Isa. The Catholic ceremony is that at the end of the worship, the priest gives every participant a sip of liquor with a piece of biscuit dipped in it and tells the person, this is the flesh and this is the blood of Sayyidina Isa, and now you are one with him. No theology, no rational process, no nothing can explain how liquor becomes blood, how biscuit becomes flesh. But you have to accept it and feel proud of it. That's the example of dogma. Islam has no dogma. All these terms used by the Quran indicate it's not a blind belief. It's a matter of using all these faculties leading to certain meaningful conclusions which impact on human behavior. So, whatever impacts on human behavior is what we call ethics. Human behavior is controlled by should I do it or not? And when the question of should comes, it is essentially a matter of is it right or wrong, halal or haram. When halal haram becomes the basis, then everything becomes synchronized. Then whether you have emotions or logical thinking, both have to conform with these two basic Islamic principles. Is that clear?
That means it does not have essentially what we understand as an outward approval is as equal as an inward approval.
जी
तस्कीर के मानो तो
जी
आउटवर्ड नहीं है
जी जी
उतना ही इनवर्ड
ये उसके दोनों पहलू हैं. ये महज एक जाविये में बैठ के ज़रबे लगाना नहीं है. कोई और अगर
सवाल ऑनलाइन ऑडियंस पे से
जी
the question is nafs lawama, that is a reproaching part of the self, seems to be moderating evil. Moderating evil effects of the self, that amara, to create a state of balance, a serene self that rightly and intelligently adjudicates upon ethical issues, and the outcome is a harmonious or peaceful, serene self. Am I rightly understanding?
Very simply, if we study the story of Sayyidina Yusuf, the answer comes very clearly that he was guided by his nafs, which was leading towards good. But momentarily, he was being attacked by the nafs, which was inclining towards wrong. But within a friction of time, nafs mutmainna prevailed over both, and he was saved from falling in wrong. This is what the Quran tells us very clearly. But problem is we don't read the Quran with a open mind. We read the Quran with a preconditioned understanding of Quranic ayat. So if we read the Quran without preconditioned concepts, then many of the questions that come to our mind are answered very clearly without any complication. So nafs mutmainna means that nafs which has totally surrendered to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and has taken Allah's rida or pleasing him as the ideal. This keeps the person balanced. This keeps the behavior on the right track, and this helps in avoiding any of those temptations which come from the same nafs, which also becomes support for goodness. These are not three separate entities standing elsewhere. These are three dimensions of one and same person who has to differentiate between those tendencies and trends that can emerge based on our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we relate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala strongly in terms of doing what is halal, avoiding haram, then nafs mutmainna assist a person in fighting all those temptations which may be disastrous for an individual. एक और सवाल था कोई आप? जी प्लीज.
Go back to the question. Referring to
जी
referring to
जी
it's clear that a prophet has this characteristic of mind, and Amara as well. And Rama is evident.
जी.
So I still I'm wondering that if every human being is a prophet, do they have all the potential, or it is because we know that the
जी
Allah has given us from this. So is the development of these two third one, are they are existing separately and we are responsible to develop our
See, the Quran tells us that prophets are essentially human beings, and human beings are subject to human conditions. Therefore, it says, why do you wonder this prophet walks in the streets, eats? Some of them passed away, some of them were killed. Don't you think that if this person had any powers, this person could accumulate everything for himself? But he is not. Therefore, all those references in the Quran, not one but many, tell us that they are essentially human beings. In Sayyidina Musa's case, when he is right at a place where very few persons will feel proud, and he throws his staff on Tur, and that becomes a snake, then the Quran says he ran away, which means human. Hmm? So humanity of prophets are emphasized again and again by the Quran in many examples. In the case of Hazrat Yusuf also, the problem is that as human being, he was at the verge of listening to the temptation. But since prophets of Allah are 24 hours monitored and they are supposed to be masoom, therefore they cannot indulge in something wrong. And that's why the Quran says an ayah guided Yusuf from falling in a trap. And that ayah means he was being watched and guided and monitored, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could never allow his messenger to enter in an area which was not ethically permissible. Therefore, nafs lawama and nafs ammara do exist, as the Quran tells us, but it wants us to educate ourselves, train ourselves, and let the nafs mutmainna prevail on them. It is, if I use a physical example, all of you know better than me that biofeedback is a workable process. Biofeedback simply refers to a combination of psychological and physical therapy through which I change my body's responses. Both are involved in that. Now, if we can do it through biofeedback, then why not, when we have a feedback of halal and haram, then nafs becomes fully tamed and trained in distinguishing between what is the limit and boundary, where haram starts, where halal ends, and that becomes the basis of on the spot decision, not a long process of argumentation and then coming, which becomes essentially cognitive, or not just emotive, which means without any rationalization. So both aspects of current psychological approaches are rejected by the Quranic approach of this synergy.